Behind Closed Doors, Domestic Violence is made possible with the support of Providence Health and Services.
Good evening, I'm K2's Deborah Knapp, and welcome to Behind Closed Doors, Domestic Violence. Tonight we take a closer look at this hidden epidemic. The statistics are shocking, and the victims could be as close as the person next door. It has no prejudice or boundaries.
Domestic violence doesn't care what your W-2 says. It doesn't care about the color of your skin, where you work, where you live, what you drive. It's an equal opportunity destroyer.
And it will likely affect you or someone you know. Tammy Burns is a survivor and now an advocate to end domestic violence.
It's your mother, it's your sister, it's your best friend, it's that woman walking down the street, anyone can be a victim of domestic violence.
And many people are. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 4 women in the U.S. reports experiencing violence by a current or former spouse or boyfriend at some point in life.
When I think about that 1 in 4, statistically, you think of bars and graphs, those are faces. Those are people with heartbeats, with, mothers and sisters and daughters and aunts and I think that's what we tend to forget.
Tammy has devoted her life to education and awareness by starting Break the Chain Apparel.
We've made it easy. You can make a difference simply by getting dressed. If you wear a t-shirt that says "Make a Stand Against an Angry Hand," which is our anti-domestic violence t-shirt, and walk through the grocery store, someone's going to read that, and that message may trigger something in them to be able to ask for help.
The violence can be deadly. On average, more than 3 women a day are murdered by their husbands or boyfriends, according to the Department of Justice. The emotional abuse pattern can start young. The Justice Department shows women of all ages are at risk, but women between 20 and 24 are at the greatest risk of non-fatal violence at the hands of a partner. And 1 in 3 teenage girls reports she's the victim of emotional or verbal abuse from a boyfriend.
It's all about control. That's what domestic violence is. It's about control. It's not about the actual violent act. It's the act of control.
It's a type of control conditioning Tammy wants people to be educated about, and she wants to provide information to empower women to know it's not their fault.
It's been put in the closet for so long. It's a shameful act, being a survivor myself. You begin to think it's all my fault. So if I wouldn't have done this act or if I wouldn't have been late, or if I would have cooked what he wanted, or, I wouldn't have worn that dress, whatever, this wouldn't have happened to me. And you begin to wear that shame.
For more information on resources, you can head to the Family Matters section of our website at katu.com. When we return, how a woman found courage after her fairy tale romance turned into a nightmare of physical and emotional abuse.
Our kids are what you call high energy, so we go to the doctor a lot. Thanks to Providence Health Plan, we can see our neighborhood doctor. We're totally covered for things like yearly checkups, and we can call a Providence nurse 24/7. As crazy as things get, it's nice not to worry about health coverage. That's peace of mind.
Learn more about us at providencehealthplan.com. At Providence Health Plan, it's not just healthcare, it's how we care.
It makes people uncomfortable when you expose secrets. The key to a good interrogation is knowing far more information about the person you're going to interrogate than they ever imagined that you could have. You let them speak, and they'll tell lies, they'll tell another lie, and then you hit them with a fact, and the lies start to come apart. It's incredibly difficult to get somebody to confess to something on camera. When you stun them with facts, and if they can't make up a story to cover right there on the spot, then you know you've got them.
Her story is all too familiar, but her courage to stand up to her abuser won back her life. Nikki Peeler remembers her childhood as a happy one.
We grew up in a very conservative home, lots of love, lots of I love yous.
She didn't know violence. By nature, she's a trusting person and sees the best in people, including her second husband when she met him.
Perfect gentleman, well-mannered, very charismatic, very positive, uplifting.
But after a few months together, things changed. She saw a very different side of the man she married.
We were together a good solid 8 months before the very first incident. I lived about 8 minutes exactly from work, and it was like clockwork. I was home about 8 after 5. And this particular night, I came in, I looked at the clock when I pulled in, and it was 12 after. And he met me at the car, and I barely had turned off the ignition, and he had me out of the car by my hair and dragged me in the house. And that was my first encounter with any type of physical abuse or assault or anything. I'd never, it's something you see on court TV.
Nikki says she was so in shock. He apologized about what happened. She blew it off as an isolated incident. 5 months went by, nothing. Back to what she calls his charming personality. Then it happened again.
After the second incident, it was over. It was continuously.
The abuse wasn't only physical, it was about control.
When I took my lunches, I had to take my lunch and spend it with him, whether it was over the phone, because he worked out of town. So if he was out of town, I had to take my lunch and literally be on the phone for an hour with him. I had to take every single phone call that he made. If I missed even a single phone, I had to take the phone with me to the restroom. Everywhere I went, that phone went with me.
It was her dad, who doesn't even live in Oregon, who recognized she needed help after she was banned from talking to even her family on the phone.
What I want you to do is I want you to get me your attorney's phone number when you can. I'm going to be sending you a cell phone, your own cell phone, to work, and I'm going to open up an account for you. And that was my out. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. So that was my out.
The violence grew more intense, and so did the threats. They went beyond her.
He threatened to kill my son because he knew, his exact words were, "You went through so much to get your son, and it's the one thing you can never replace. So I will take the one thing away from you and make you think about it forever." I'd saved all these recordings and tried to stay in hiding, and finally that morning I just said enough was enough, and I went down to go get a restraining order. Well, he found me. He'd been driving up and down, and unfortunately I took a route that he was on, and he found me and blocked me from going to the police station. So the only other place that I thought would be safe was work, and then I thought, oh, I can't bring that kind of drama to work. So I went across the street to a very open public place, and he had described to me where my son was, exactly where he was, and had someone on standby, and was talking to this person on the phone. Someone on standby that all he had to do was give the word if I didn't get in the truck and cooperate with him. So he ended up kidnapping me and taking me out into Kaiser, Oregon, and where he raped and sodomized me.
She went straight to police despite his continued threats against her and her son. The next day, police officers arrested Kenneth Peeler. Because Nikki was brave and pressed charges, 5 other women stepped forward with similar stories of abuse at the hands of Peeler. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Well, I wasn't going to live in hiding anymore. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. And all I cared about, I wanted a long enough sentence for my son to grow up and become a man on his own, and to be able to hold his own. That, God forbid, if he ever did come after me, which, I wouldn't put it past him to come after me.
Now she's using her experience to help others by telling them they're not alone.
I live my life as an example to others, and that's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm here with my face shown and my name out there, because I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of anybody out there. For me, I just want to have a voice out there. It's a choice. It's a choice to do right and wrong, and it's also a choice to become a survivor or remain a victim.
When we return, the local group dedicated to putting a stop to domestic violence.
I certainly didn't plan to go to the hospital, but when I needed help, I went to Providence. Providence not only cared for me as a patient, they cared for me as a person. That's what you hear from everybody. It's how they care for you that makes them special. I'm here today because of Providence.
Providence Health and Services is a network of hospitals, clinics, home services, and health plans. At Providence, it's not just healthcare, it's how we care.
I think it's my job to present the truth. One of the cliches in journalism is that there's two sides to the story. I don't think that's true. I think there's often 3, 4, 5, 6 sides to a story. Being an investigator, you can't go into a story with a preconceived notion that's so concrete that you're ignoring evidence otherwise. You're ignoring the truth if that's the case. I think you have to go in not only with an open mind, but with a critical mind. Our viewers pay attention to that and can tell the difference.
Welcome back. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we want to welcome a couple of very special guests tonight. Evelyn Murray, a community activist and survivor, as well as Gabby Santos, who's from the Oregon Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, both of you. Gabby, let's start with you and what your coalition is all about.
Well, we are a statewide coalition. We identify as a dual coalition with domestic and sexual violence. We provide support for programs and community partners who come in contact with survivors of domestic abuse, sexual violence. We provide training, technical assistance. We provide media advocacy and information and resources for anybody who needs support services.
This may seem like an obvious question, but when you're in the situation of domestic violence, what is domestic violence? What does it entail?
Well, it all comes from the use of power and control to manipulate, hurt someone. It could be a family member, a partner. It could be someone you cohabitate with, part of a relationship. And we all know that it's not just two people within the relationship that get affected by this. I mean, everybody who is either witnessing or an innocent bystander is affected. The community as a whole is affected. It's a range of tactics, a continuum of abuse. It could start out as emotional, verbal, leading to physical, sexual, all the way to homicides, which is why we see in Oregon a recent DHS study that came out in 2008, the average annual homicide rate is 23. And we know that that's not an accurate statistic. We know that there are some homicides that are not classified as the domestic violence, but it is a problem, and we're seeing an increase in not only the violence itself, but the death toll.
I remember having to go to a shelter for battered women, and there weren't that many of them. There were no organizations such as what Gabby's doing to support women. There were no workshops. There was no place to go. Your abuser was not put in jail. A lot of laws have changed that protect women. And it's sad to say, but I think it's because there are more women in jail now for protecting themselves. And so I think abusers are kind of thinking twice. Women don't take the abuse that they used to.
And there is hope for women when you say that there's so many more organizations.
Oh my goodness, yes, yes there is. There's a lot of advertisement. There's not too many places you don't go where you don't find a brochure. Even when you call social service agencies now, they ask you if you're being abused, if there's any domestic violence or any child abuse. That is totally something new that was not there back in the 70s.
You notice it at the doctor's office anymore when you go. That's one of the questions they ask.
Exactly.
Gabby, let's talk about how to recognize it within your own relationship and maybe friends and family who are watching from the outside.
Yeah, well, I think that's a two-part question, because definitely in being survivor-centered, we want to honor the survivor experience and them identifying what the fear is, what exists in the type of abuse and the type of relationship they may be experiencing. And the first person to recognize it, of course, is going to be the survivor. I mean, there are so many myths out there saying that, well, she doesn't know she's in an abusive situation or all these other things. But the better way to frame that is, of course someone knows they live in fear. You know, there's even a bigger fear, a fear of the unknown. Fear of reaching out, not knowing what to expect. I think that there are many barriers in getting to a safe place. So in recognizing, the survivor knows that the safety of the household changes, the safety of the relationship, the dynamics of the relationship. Evelyn talked about the grooming process. You know, part of the education that we give to folks that ask, well, why does she stay? You know, It is evident that someone will not go out on a second date if they get physically abused on the first date. Well, perpetrators and abusers are very charming. They do not act out when they first meet someone. And part of the grooming is, showing the best character, not only to survivor, but to the community. And then over time, these tactics in a subtle way get more extreme, from emotional abuse, isolation, jealousy, having control of who she communicates with, then later using violent tactics, more physical tactics, because all tactics are violent, but more physical tactics to not allow that person to leave, to acting out on the children or the pets or the community even with threats. So there are different signs that are going to surface for survivors and for the community. It is our responsibility to know that if you see anything change within the relationship, like if all of a sudden you're not hearing from your sister, there's isolation in place from a person who used to be very active in the family or in church or in the community, that person then is isolating themselves, or it seems like they're not reaching out or they're not being as social. There's something behind that. Why is there a pattern change? And with the children as well. Why do we see children either regress or act out? And so if we ask those questions and if we reach out, we're like, I'm very concerned. This is what I'm observing. I just want to check in to see how things are, and not assuming and not pointing fingers or whatever, but providing a safe space for that person to disclose. And then in addition to that, because we know that fear and fear of the unknown is a huge barrier, providing them with a platter of culturally specific resources, that are tailored to their experience, so that they know that there is hope in reaching out for help, that it's not just getting to a safe place, it's the self-sufficiency and what's going to happen, longer-term safety as well.
We've talked a lot about domestic violence within a family, within a marriage, but the truth is a lot of this is happening at a much younger age, and girls in high school and in college, when they're dating men, this is happening, the abuse is happening as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
So in the prevention method, what is being done now to teach, to educate?
The important thing here is that everybody plays a role. Even though we may not all contribute to the violence that someone experiences, we are all part of the solution, and we have to be just as proactive that people acting out are. We live in a society that creates norms, the media, the school, parenting, all these things that can affect how someone behaves in a relationship. We can also affect the change that we want to see in safer relationships, and how we want our youth to be raised, and how we want teen relationships to look like. And we are seeing not an increase in teen dating violence, but I think that we talk about domestic violence even more, so that people who are affected in teen dating violence relationships are speaking up about their experiences more. So that means that that's a call to action for us as adults. What are we doing wrong in raising youth? What messages are we contributing to their development that's not looking healthy? How can we promote the healthy more?
So it's all about the communication at this point as well. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Evelyn, for your time tonight. For more information on resources, you can head to the Family Matters section of our website at katu.com. When we come back, know your rights, how you can use the law to protect yourself against domestic violence.
What matters to me? My family, my work, my free time. Making choices that give me peace of mind. That's why I chose Providence Medical Group. They give me convenience with a clinic right in my neighborhood. They give me online options for making appointments or emailing my doctor. I chose Providence because of how they make me feel. Supported, listened to, cared for.
At Providence, it's not just healthcare, it's how we care.
When dangerous weather approaches, K2 News is on your side.
When we see imminent dangerous conditions, we'll declare a breaking weather alert.
Breaking weather alerts are our commitment to keep you informed until the weather situation is safe.
And in severe cases, stay on the air until immediate danger passes.
Know what to expect into the evening and the next day with breaking weather alerts.
The unexpected does happen.
And when it does, K2 News is on your side to help you weather the storm.
Breaking weather alerts on K2 News.
For a lot of victims of domestic violence, they often wait too long to seek the help from either law enforcement or legal advice. So joining us today to discuss your rights is family law attorney J.W. Taylor. Thanks for being here today. Let's start with talking about marital relationships and when conflict happens. When and what are the warning signs that something is escalating?
Well, there's every family's a little bit different, but there are a few standard telltale signs that we look for. One of them is when one person, and frankly it's usually the woman, has been really isolated. So there's a cycle of violence that we see where there's a person, usually the man, who is escalating his controlling behavior, wants to cut her off from other people, wants her to feel more dependent upon him, cuts her off from money and resources. It builds and builds. There's a lot of psychological warfare that goes on, and usually it's very demeaning stuff. You're not capable, you're worthless, you're stupid, you're not capable of supporting yourself without me, you'd be on the street, that kind of talk.
It doesn't always start with the physical.
No, usually it doesn't. The physical violence is typically kind of the top of the cycle. Then very often, if a woman stays in that abusive relationship, the guy will come back with flowers and be very sorry that he did it, apologize, and then it slowly starts over again.
Mm-hmm. So when we're talking about domestic violence, and as you just said, it can often start with the control or the psychological abuse, how does the law actually define what domestic violence is?
Well, it differs a little bit from state to state, but generally it is a situation that occurs between family members or household members. You don't have to be related by blood or marriage, but you do have to be living in the same household. And one person puts the other person in fear of imminent bodily harm or imminent bodily danger, or actually does something to cause bodily harm. And that has to have happened in order to get legal protection. It has to have happened in the last 6 months. So doing something to put another person in fear has to be something you did on purpose. So, I left all the lights out and my husband fell down the stairs. I didn't do that on purpose. So there has to be an element of either reckless behavior or intentional behavior.
When you take a look at the numbers nationally and then here in the Northwest, Oregon and Washington, how prevalent is it?
Well, in Oregon, we're running about 165,000 calls a year to the helplines for domestic violence. Washington reports that 1 in 5 women will report actually being harmed by domestic violence in her lifetime. So it's very prevalent.
And these are just the reported cases and people actually calling for help, taking that step.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So that number could be much larger.
It probably is much larger.
When you look at these families and the spouses having the domestic violence, what's the impact on the children?
Well, for one thing, Oregon tries to protect children, most states do, by saying that if domestic violence occurs in the presence of one of the children, that escalates the event to a potential felony. So it's very serious, and the reason that Oregon does that is because children can be permanently harmed. Studies seem to indicate that boys are twice as likely to abuse their partners in adult life if they watched their mother or their father being abused as a child. Little girls are much more likely to suffer from anxiety and, those kinds of long-term mental health issues.
And rational thought would think that the little boy wouldn't grow into that man to abuse if they witnessed that happening to their mother, but it's the exact opposite.
It's exactly the opposite.
When you talk about domestic violence, we always assume it's the woman being abused. Mm-hmm. Are there cases when the man is abused?
Yeah, in fact, we think there's probably a lot more domestic violence against men than we realize because men don't want to report this. The truth, however, and there are a lot of cases, I've personally represented a number of men who were attacked by their domestic partner, but the truth is that women are more likely to be seriously injured. Women, in the month of December in 2009, in the state of Oregon alone, 18 people died as a domestic violence, the outcome of domestic violence. 8 of those 18 were men. They were the perpetrators, and they also killed themselves in the same event. So 7 women, Several children and 8 men all died in 1 month in December in Oregon. So, you know, men and women, we're in this together. It's a culmination of a massive breakdown in relationship.
That's
obviously.
an interesting statistic, speaking of just the month of December. Are there times of the year that it tends to escalate more?
Yes, there are, and we used to always think, well, the holidays, everybody has unrealistic expectations about family involvement during the holidays. But the fact is, statistically, the highest month of the year is usually July. So maybe it has to do with the heat, or kids being out of school, or there's something else going on in the month of July. In addition to that, any holiday where there's a lot of alcohol consumption, we'll see a bump in domestic violence. So that would be 4th of July, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day.
What legal options do victims have? Do they need to get an attorney?
They sure do if it's a serious, ongoing domestic violence problem. First thing they have to realize is that there's nothing that a person can do to another person that warrants a physical response. So if a woman is cheating on her husband, or a terrible mom, or a terrible housewife, or whatever his complaints are, he doesn't have a right to strike her. So a lot of women feel that they deserve it, that they're the cause of it, and that's never true. You can't threaten to hurt somebody physically, and you can't hurt them physically. That's illegal. So if that happens, you need to go get help. You can go to victims assistance. Every single county has victims assistance workers who will tell you step by step what to do. You can go down to the courthouse. We have in most counties a family law desk or a domestic violence desk, and there are people standing there who will tell you exactly how to fill out the forms. And they'll tell you if you've got all the factors that you need to go into court and get a restraining order.
Are there any ways that we can improve the laws? Are they working the way they are?
Well, I think the biggest problem is people don't know where to go to get help. People think they have to spend a lot of money. Usually often these victims have been isolated from money. That doesn't mean, by the way, that they're from poor families.
Right.
It means that somebody has cut them off financially. So it's very hard for them to get help. We could do a better job helping those people if we had more, if they had more access to free legal advice and more volunteer lawyers, frankly.
So we'll encourage those lawyers to do those pro bono work. But there is support available. There are resources for people to go to.
Yes, you can also call the police. Police report that the vast majority of their calls, their 911 calls, are domestic violence calls. But you have to understand that it's not enough to say, he told me that his lawyer's meaner than my lawyer, or he's going to take all my money in the divorce. That is not domestic violence. Domestic violence is when it escalates to a threat or actual physical harm, bodily harm. Not sending you to the hospital, but grabbing you, pushing you against a wall, throwing you on the floor, those kinds of things.
And take those moments seriously and turn to help when they happen.
Because it can get a lot worse.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, family law attorney J.W. Taylor.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Our kids are what you call high energy, so we go to the doctor a lot. Thanks to Providence Health Plan, we can see our neighborhood doctor. We're totally covered for things like yearly checkups, and we can call a Providence nurse 24/7. As crazy as things get, it's nice not to worry about health coverage. That's peace of mind.
Learn more about us at ProvidenceHealthPlan.com. At Providence Health Plan, it's not just healthcare, it's how we care.
They dress very nicely, they've got suits on, they wear ties, and they're out there ripping you off. Knowledge is powerful, and I think if we can give people the knowledge that these type of people are out there, they're going to try to get your money, they're going to try to get your house, they're going to try to get your car. The criminals, the con men, are so good at what they do. I hope people watch what we're doing and they take something from it. You know what, this sounds like the scheme that Tom Jensen told me about on K-Tour. I saw that on K2, you're not going to fool me.
Before we say goodnight, if you or someone you know is a victim of domestic violence, don't hesitate to ask for help. There are resources available. We have a list on our website. Go to the Family Matters section of KATU.com. For K2 and Family Matters, I'm Deborah Knapp. Good night.